Greetings. Welcome to the Greek class. And today we are going to focus on the idea of the voice. We have so far been talking about the active voice, and now we're going to talk about the middle voice. Our last class we looked at the idea of the mood, the various moods that we have in Greek, and before then we looked at the tenses. Today we are going to talk about the voice. So let's give a bit of overview in terms of what the middle voice is about, as well as the whole idea of the voice. So far all verbs that we have discussed in this class have been in the active voice. In this lesson we'll introduce the middle voice, and voice, you will recall, indicates the role that the subject plays in the action of the verb. Okay, so the action that the role that the subject plays in the action of the verb, and we can look at some examples. We have three voices, of course: the active, the middle, and the passive. So the active voice, the subject causes the action: I move the car. The passive voice, the subject receives the consequences of the action: the car was moved. The middle, however, the subject is part of all of the action. In other words, the subject is both the cause and the focus, the agent and the experiencer of a verbal action. Right? So that's very important for us to be able to differentiate. So if you say, I untie the boat, right? So that's the active voice, right? The boat is untied, that's the passive voice. The boat moved itself, that's the middle voice, we could say. Okay, so let's move on. So deponent, middle, is a middle voice that has no active form but is active in meaning. Deponent, from Latin deponere, has to do with something laid aside. A deponent verb is one that has laid aside its original force. Middle or passive deponent has replaced it with an active meaning. So in terms of how it looks very much like a middle or a passive voice, but its meaning is actually active. So for example, we have John 21:13, Erketai Jesus kai lambanei ton arton. Jesus comes and takes the bread. Jesus comes and takes the bread. So erketai is deponent middle, whereas lambanai is active voice. But in terms of meaning, erketai is actually active, right? Just the same way as lambanei. Okay. So the deponent endings, just like we have endings for the active voice, we also have endings for the deponent middle. So the word we're going to use, initially we used the word luo, now we'll use the word ruomai, and ruomai means I rescue. So the present tense is ruomai, the second person is rue, third person is ruetai, first person plural is ruometha, second plural is rueste, third plural is ruontai. In the future, ruzomai, ruze, ruzetai, ruzometha, ruzeste, ruzontai. In the imperfect, we have erumen, eru, erueto, eruometha, erueste, eruonto. In the aorist, eruzamen, eruzo, eruzato, eruzametha, eruzaste, eruzanto. Okay, so again, you need to know the endings. So omai, etai, ometha, este, ontai. In the future, we are adding here the sigma suffix, so the ending is still the same, just like the present. The imperfect endings, of course, are different. So omen, u, eto, ometha, este, onto. And then for the aorist, remember the R sound still characteristic of the aorist. Zamen, so you still have the sigma suffix, but then the endings are very much like those of the imperfect to a certain extent. So you can say that here we have eto, here is ato, here we have u, here we have o, here we have ometha, here it's ametha, este, aste, onto, anto. Okay, so it's important to know these endings because that's what will help you to differentiate. So the endings are completely different from those of Luo. As in Luo, the aorist endings have an R sound. The other tenses have an O or A sound. The endings in the future are the same as the present, only that there's a sigma suffix, like I mentioned. The endings are very similar in the different tenses, except for the second singular. The addition of epsilon and sigma have the same features as in Luo. Thus, arkomai, I begin, and future is arksomai, the imperfect erkomen, and the aorist erksamen. Okay, so endings are the same. So moving on, we now look at omai, ruomai in other moods. Remember now, we have introduced ourselves to the indicative mood, as well as the imperative mood, the infinitive mood, and the participle. So the imperative is ruo, rueste, ruzai, ruzaste. The infinitive ruzestai, ruzastai. Okay. The participle ruomenos, ruomenoi, plural, ruzamenos, ruzamenoi, plural. So whereas in the other moods we saw that the participle is, for example, we can say luon and then luontes, right? Now the endings of the participle is menos and menoi. So when you see menos and menoi, then you know you're dealing with the deponent. Okay. As for luo, the second plural present imperatives are the same as the second plural present indicatives. The context will help you differentiate. The aorist in the other moods lack the A, but still has the sigma as well as the R sound in the endings. Otherwise, the present 10 endings are very similar to the aorist. The participles have a distinctive men, so you must note that. So, so in terms of passing the following, for example, erkontai, it's present indicative third plural. Elogizonto, imperfect indicative third singular. Sunerkomen, imperfect indicative first singular. Arnesamenos, aorist participle singular. Desketai, future indicative third singular. Up to, present imperative second singular. Eizerkomenoi, present participle plural masculine nominative. Ergazemenos, zomenos, present participle singular masculine nominative. Aspazeste, present indicative second plural, or present imperative second plural. So you get how these come about. So using the deponent verbs mean exactly the same as normal verbs. So they mean exactly the same. In terms of meaning, there is no difference. So which verbs are deponent? Many of them are intransitive verbs, that is, they cannot have an object. I go, though there are so many exceptions. The form of the verb in the vocabulary list or dictionary, since verbs are always quoted in their first person singular present indicative, or like luo, omai, like ruomai. Okay. So which verbs are deponent? These verbs are active. So pisteo, I believe. Erkomai, I come, deponent. Baptizo, I baptize. Erkomai, I begin. So you see that the deponent are, you can see the endings, but in terms of meaning, they mean the same thing. So put the following verbs in the form indicated. Blepo, present third plural indicative. So it's blepozin. Erkomai, present third is singular indicative, erketai. Dekomai, imperfect second plural indicative, edexeste. Arkomai, aorist, masculine, nominative, plural, participle, arxamenoi. Grapho, future indicative, plural, indicative, grapsomen. Okay, so you should be able to put the words in the form that they need to be. The same thing here, you can also do the same. I will allow you to exercise with that. You can take a screenshot and see if you can do it without, and mark for yourself whether you've gotten it correct. Okay, so terminology: the deponent verbs are in the middle voice, the normal verbs are in the active voice. Deponent verbs are in the middle voice, normal verbs are in the active voice. So some vocabulary: erkomai means I come, I go. Aperkomai means I depart or I go away. Daerkomai, I cross over. Ezerkomai, I go into, I enter. Exerkomai, I go out, I go away. Parerkomai, I go by, pass by. Proserkomai, I come to, go to, or approach. You can see that here the beginning of the word kind of gives you what you're dealing with, because erkomai means I come, I go. But then when you put when you make it a compound verb, then it means that the beginning of it decides for you what's happening in terms of what it means. So take note of that. And then sunerkomai, I come together. Okay, soon, the soon, yeah, it's the favorite word of the Apostle Paul whenever he's talking about doing something together, being, co-baptized or things like that. He uses soon group of words. Aptomai, I touch. Aniromai, I refuse, deny. Arkomai, I begin. Aspazomai, I greet. Derkomai, I receive. Ergazomai, I work. Evangelizomai, I proclaim good news. Logizomai, I calculate, consider. Proserkomai, I pray. Proskaliomai, I summon. Ruomai, I rescue. That's the word that we are using as an example. Then we have Herodes, Herod, Ioannes, John, Mathetes, disciple, prophetess, prophet, Strationetes, soldier, Upertes, servant. These are masculine nouns that are like prophetess. Okay. And then and three like Judas, Barnabas, Judas, Judah, Sanatas, Satan, Elias, Elijah. That's with the U sound. With three feminine words declining like logos: Airguptos, Egypt; Eremos, wilderness, desolate; Odos, way or road. These are the halfway practice. You can again take time to practice. It is in your book. See if you can translate this by providing the correct answer, and then come back to this presentation to see what the correct answer is. Okay, the same goes for this part. The imperfect future and other moods of eimi. You remember we've already looked at the present tense of eimi, which is the verb to be. So eimi, estin, esmen, este, eizin. This word is showed up quite a number of times in our translations. Estin, which is he or she, it. And then in the future it becomes ezomai. In the eze, estai, ezometha, ezeste, ezontai. Imperfect amen, es, en, amen, or emetha, ete, ezan. Present infinitive, einai. Present participle, on, and then ontes, plural. So that's your the verb to be. Very important. So you will encounter it in a number of places. This kind of explains for you. The imperfect begins with an eta, the present and future, and epsilon. This makes sense. If one adds the augment for the imperfect to an epsilon, one gets an eta. The future is almost exactly like epsilon plus sigma as for the future, plus deponent endings, except the second singular is estai rather than ezetai. There can be no aorist of Amy, since being in the past, it is naturally imperfect, describing a process or a continued state. So we don't have an aorist of Amy. Very, very important. Again, some more translations to do. You could translate this. For example, Hagiai, Ezan, I, and Tolai. The commandments were holy. Or Dawoodi and Megas. David was great. Thelo and I met Auton. I wish to be with them. John 23. Ho Petros Kai. Ho Alos Mathetes. Erkonto Eis To Numeion. Peter and the other disciples were coming to the tomb. So Erkonto were coming to the tomb. So this is the masculine nouns, like similar to Arche, prophetess, and Judas. These are nouns that have confusing gender, so they look very much like feminine nouns, but they are actually masculine. So prophetess, propheten, prophetu, prophete, prophetai, prophetas, propheton, prophetis. And then Judas, Judan, Judah. The rare words in us for which the plural is logical have the same endings as in prophetess. Okay, of course there wouldn't be plural of Judas. Yeah. So these nouns are unusual for not having vocatives identical to other nominatives. The vocatives are propheta and Judah. Nouns in alpha, sigma, whose stems end in epsilon, iota, or rome, alias, have a genitive in u, lu, copying prophetess. Okay. So feminine nouns identical to logos, odos, way, eremos, wilderness, aiguptos, Egypt. Agreements: when these nouns have the article, adjective, or anything else which has to agree with them, the word which agrees with them have to go in the actual gender of the nouns rather than simply the endings matching. So ton, propheten, tes, odu, to, pisto, barnaba. Okay. So first declension, limited number of words like prophetess, arche, in terms of masculine, and then arche. And then second declension, logos, few words like odos, declining like logos and ergon. Logos, arche, ergon. Limited number of nouns like prophetess, which have feminine looking endings. Few nouns like odos, which decline like the masculine logos. In neuter, there is none. Let's now look at some, of course, this is now your exercise, and it's in section B. Okay, this is section A. So, erketai ho Jesus kai lambanei ton arton. Jesus is coming, and he takes the bread. Right? Jesus is coming, right? Erketai, and takes the bread. So that's the translation. So thank you very much for taking time to listen to this lecture. God bless you. Bye-bye.